You know, I was thinking this morning that when I was a young man growing up in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a general excitement in the world about the year 2000. Everybody was anticipating something massive to happen in the year 2000. Some people thought that Jesus would come, and people were talking about Y2K and the end of the millennium and what is going to happen. And I'm thinking this morning that, do you know that 2000 came and went, and it's 23 years ago. 23 years ago. Now I hear others talking about something big happening in 2030. Whether that will be so or not, I don't know. The point I'm making is that we are much closer now to the return of our Lord than we were in the 90s. I used to look forward. I used to view the coming of Christ as something that I was a bit scared of. I was a bit tentative about it because I kept thinking to myself, will I be ready? Can I make it in time? It wasn't something that I looked forward to eagerly. But I'm happy to say that that has changed now. When I understand that the coming of the Lord is near and that He's coming for us, we are safe in Him who are in Him. It's something that I look forward now with anticipation. It's just something interesting that I thought I would mention. Now, the topic of my presentation this morning is when you were little. When you were little. There's a philosophy that is taught in every primary school, every high school, every tertiary institution. There is a philosophy that businessmen and business moguls and the great and successful men of this world adopt. And they try to, they put up memos about it in their offices. They try to ingrain it in their very lives. And in fact, when I was becoming a teacher, when I was training to become a teacher, they taught me that if I can get students to understand this philosophy, 90% of my work will be done. And what is that philosophy? It is that you must always believe in yourself. Believe in yourself and you can achieve whatever you set your mind to. There's a song that goes, you can be what you want to be and see what you want to see. Just believe in yourself. I actually went online and looked up some quotes that people normally put up in their offices or in their homes. I'll read a few of them. This one says, if you need something to believe in, start with yourself. Another one says, believe in yourself. You are enough. A bird sitting on a tree is never afraid of the branch breaking because its trust is not on the branch, but on its own wings. Another one, believe in your infinite potential. It surprises me how brazen people are sometimes. So man has infinite potential. It says your only limits are those you set upon yourself. I thought that was God. Another one says, believing in yourself is the first step to success. Believe in yourself so strongly that the world can't help but believe in you too. And the final one says, when you believe in yourself, you have 100% of the people you need. In other words, all you need is yourself. Right? And as I said, this is a philosophy that all the successful people of the world have adopted and they live by it. The great men of the world have a fierce belief, in some cases a blasphemous belief in themselves. You hear them talk about themselves. I mean, Muhammad Ali was one of them who comes to mind quickly. He used to brag about how great he was and trash talk his opponents before a fight. He would tell them what round he would knock them out in, and many times he would do it. When you listen to the singers and the rappers, they speak of themselves in such glowing terms. They refer to themselves in the third person. In fact, Jay-Z is probably the most famous rap artist in the world. Jay-Z has nicknamed himself Hove or Hova. According to him, that's his God name, right? And Hova is short for Jehovah. According to him, he is the king of rap. He's the god of rap. I'm sorry. And so he refers to himself as Hova, right? Blasphemous fellow. But this is how the world views success. If you believe in yourself, all you need is yourself. Now, of course, we all on this platform know that this principle is diametrically opposed to the principle of the Bible. In the Bible, am I saying that you should be confident when you are going to do something? No. If I'm going to wash the dishes, I have confidence that I can wash them well. But I also understand that I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me. And it is important that we teach children not that you have infinite potential inside you to be whatever you want to be, but that I can be all things in Christ. It is important to teach them that, in the words of Jesus, without me, you can do nothing. In fact, Jesus says in Matthew chapter 10 and verse 39, and this verse is what I want to focus on this morning. Jesus says something that we normally interpret one way. I'm going to put a spin on it this morning and interpret it, expand on the interpretation. What he said. He says, "He that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it." That's an interesting verse. Let's dissect what that means. What does it mean for a person to lose his own life? He's not talking about killing yourself. What it means to lose your own life, what it means to find your own life is to become the master of your own destiny. It is to become the boss of your own life. It is to believe in yourself and to believe that you are capable of running your own show. This is what it means to find your own life. And Jesus says, whoever does this will lose his life. I want to point out to you that this principle of finding your own life and being your own boss had its roots in the Garden of Eden at the beginning. In Genesis chapter 3, I'll read verses 5 and 6. Look at where this ideology sprang from. The serpent says to Eve, "For God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil." So Eve was tantalized and hypnotized by the idea of being her own God, of running her own show, of controlling her own destiny, of believing in herself. That is where the idea came into being. In fact, the serpent went on to say that, the passage went on to say that when the woman saw that the tree was good for food and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to do what? To make one wise. I asked myself the question, what more wisdom did Eve need? Everything that they needed to know had been put in their heads. They could speak the moment they were created. All they needed to know about the world that they lived in were available to them. I'm kind of stumbling a bit because I have a cold, so please excuse me. It was all available to them. There was nothing that they needed to know that God had not taught them. Yet Eve wanted more wisdom. She wanted more knowledge to give her the ability to be her own boss, her own ruler. And so man's original desire was to find his own life. And it is an idea that developed in the children of Adam and Eve, and it escalated in every child of Adam and Eve throughout the ages. Men took that philosophy and they built on it. They became Great men upon the earth by believing in themselves. Some of them became great generals, some became kings, they became fabulously wealthy. They achieved what the world would consider greatness. But in every case, you know what happened? Just like Jesus said, they lost their lives. Now let me expound on what it means to lose your life a bit here. When Jesus said that you would lose your life, the first thing that comes to mind is that you're going to lose your eternal salvation. And that is true, right? The person who takes charge of his own destiny always ends up at the same place, which is losing his life. So his eternal destiny is in danger. His physical life itself, of course, we are all going to lose that. But it's more than that for the person who finds his own life. You know why? Because what happens to that person is that that person dies while still alive. If you go back and check the history of all these men who achieved greatness upon their own and through their own efforts and their own initiatives, all of them at some point or another they ended up dying before they died. What do I mean by that? Their lives reached a place where all they had left was hopelessness and despair. The bodies were alive and you could see them moving around, but they were dead and hopeless inside. You know, Alexander the Great, probably the most brilliant military tactician who ever lived. In 5 years, Alexander conquered the entire known world using an army that traveled on foot and on horseback. Something that even today, with the military prowess that we have, would almost be impossible. Alexander conquered the entire world. By believing in himself and becoming his own master and controlling his own destiny, he became the conqueror of the world. Do you know what happened to Alexander at 30 years old after he had achieved this greatness? He was so hopeless and he was so depressed that all he had lived for was now gone. Alexander drank himself into a drunken stupor at 30 years old and died from drunkenness with nothing left to live for at 30 years old. Cleopatra was probably Egypt's greatest queen. In despair and hopelessness, while she was still a young woman, still beautiful, still with the world at her fingertips, Cleopatra killed her children and then committed suicide. Same thing with Pontius Pilate. Pilate, the man who was so arrogant and pompous and aloof when he was dealing with Jesus, judging the Son of God. And Jesus said to him, "You would have no power over me if it had not been given you from above." You know that history says that Pilate ended up killing himself? Same thing with Nero. Nero was one of the most notorious emperors that the Roman Empire ever produced. It was his life's ambition to make the lives of Christians miserable. He spent his entire career martyring Christians. He used them to light up his garden at nights and watched while they roasted. And Nero ended up stabbing himself in his own neck. Hopeless. And I could go on and list these people who found their own lives. And while they were still alive, they lost it in despair. I mean, you come to the modern dispensation. Many of you know who Robin Williams was. Robin Williams was one of the most brilliant comedians of this age. He could make anybody laugh. Right? His movies are still available to be watched. A very funny guy, a multimillionaire, a massive mansion, highly successful life in the eyes of everybody, in despair and hopelessness when all of that was still available to him. The man who had forged his own destiny, found his own life, believed in himself, he ended up committing suicide, killing himself. If you do some proper research, you will find that hundreds and hundreds of these Hollywood actors and actresses who seem to have everything, They can drive any car they want to drive. They can stay in any hotel. They can buy anything their heart desires. I mean, I've even heard of some of them who have bought their own islands. I was reading this week about one who bought a yacht costing almost $400 million. Everything at their disposal. You know what? I discovered about many hundreds of these celebrities. They can hardly wait for the day to be over to go home and inject something into their veins or sniff something just to give them the extra little result, that extra little kick to make it through the next day. They are junkies, they are drug addicts, and they depend on drugs to prop them up and keep them going and keep them sane each day. Right? These people who seem to have everything, yet they have found their own lives. And as Jesus said, all of them, what is happening to them is that they are losing their lives because there is a hole in the soul that nothing can fill except the one who made us. And so they try to fill it by becoming as famous as possible. They try to fill it by becoming as rich as possible, by enjoying their lives as much as possible. And while they're doing that, they're all dying inside because he that findeth his own life, says the wisest man who ever lived, will always lose it. I mean, I can't talk about people finding their own lives without mentioning what is happening in the world today. I believe that this dispensation is the culmination, the zenith of what started in Eden. There's never been an age when man has found himself and become the masters of his own destiny more than today. And there's a movement on the world today which epitomizes and encapsulates all of what I'm saying this morning. It is called the woke movement. Right now, the word woke in itself implies that if you are now woke, what was your situation before? You were asleep, right? So I guess woke people are saying that they are now enlightened and they are now awakened to the dark, from the darkness that they were in before. You all know that this movement is spreading filth and corruption and abomination in the entire world. But I want to focus on one aspect of it this morning, which is transgenderism. Right, a word we didn't have a few years ago. When I was a boy, I've never heard that word before. Transgenderism. You know, there's a question that is being asked in the world today that professors can't answer, ministers in parliament can't answer, scholars can't answer, government heads can't answer. Yet it's a question that my 2-year-old son Zane can answer in a sentence. It's a question that if it were asked 5 years ago by anybody, all the onlookers who heard the question would commit that person to the madhouse for their well-being. You know what the question is? What is a woman? What is a woman? Just go on YouTube and type in that question and you will see what I'm talking about. Because the people who are now masters of their own destiny, their own gods, who are now woke and have found their own lives, you know what they are now proposing? They are proposing that gender is not something that you are born with. Gender is not determined by the biological tools that you are born with. Gender is determined by how you feel inside. And so I'm looking at Brother Lad this morning, sitting there with his beard and with his broad, thick shoulders. Everything I'm seeing in front of me tells me that Brother Lad is a man. But if Brother Lad says, I am a woman, all he needs to do is say it. He doesn't need to offer any biological facts. All he needs to do is say it. And I am supposed to accept what he says. Because guess what? If I say, but Brother Lad, you're a man, you know what? I'm transphobic. And I'm spreading hate. And so this is the logical outcome of what happens when men take their own destinies into their hands. Lunacy. I Ketanji Brown Jackson. That's the name of the first black woman who was ever nominated to the U.S. Supreme Court. And you know, this week or a couple of weeks ago, Ketanji Brown Jackson was sitting for her Senate confirmation hearing, and she was asked by one of the Republican senators, "Tell us, what is a woman?" This woman is being nominated for the Supreme Court of the United States, the highest court in the land. You know what her response was? "I did not come prepared to answer that question today, and I can't answer the question because I'm not a biologist." So I suppose you need to be a biologist before you can say what a woman is. The same thing happened with the Prime Minister of New Zealand. He was having a press conference and he was speaking so fluently and doing so well until he was asked by a reporter, "What is a woman?" And I'm telling you, that man stumbled and he stuttered and he twisted himself into pretzels for about 3 minutes, unable to answer the question. He said the question caught him left field. He had prepared to be asked that question and he wasn't sure how to answer. What is a woman? Eventually he said, gender is determined by each person. Each person has to determine their own gender. Too afraid to speak the truth because he doesn't want to offend a small group of people who are turning the world upside down. So instead of saying to these people, a man gets up and he says, "Listen, I'm a woman." Instead of saying to him, "You belong, you need some psychiatric assistance," what the rest of the world is doing now, they say, "Oh, you say you're a woman? Okay, we all comply. So we will call you a woman. We will deny the truth and common sense and reality itself because we don't want to offend these people who have found their own lives and have become their own gods." So instead of correcting the insanity, the whole world is going along with it. Like the Prime Minister of England, Rishi Sunak, was asked the same question. And thankfully, he had the guts to say, "A woman is an adult female." And I'm telling you that the backlash and the criticism, he has been lambasted and called a transphobe, and he has been accused of spreading hate speech. And it was, how could a leader say something like that? How could a leader say a woman is an adult female? And people are saying that because of that statement, it is unlikely that he's going to be re-elected. Can you imagine that? This is the outcome of what happens when men find their own lives. Insanity and madness takes over. Just this week, I was reading an article that the University of the West Indies here in Jamaica, the top university in the country, they are now lobbying to put legislation into place. Legislation to say that you have to call a person by their preferred pronoun. Think about that, their preferred pronouns. When I was growing up, and I'm sure all of us, throughout the history of time, there have only been two pronouns that I know about, he and she. Now they want to put legislation into place that you have to call a person by the pronouns they prefer to be called by. And transgender men got up. I have to use that term because even though I don't believe there's any such thing, this is what they are now using. So I'm using it so you can understand what I'm saying. A transgender man gets up and you have to call him she. And a transgender woman gets up and you have to call her him. And they weren't satisfied with that. They didn't want to be called he or she. You have to say they when you are referring to one person or them. Defy the laws of language itself to facilitate the lunacy of a few people. Now they are still not satisfied with using they or them. So you know what they have done now? They have now developed an entirely new set of pronouns that did not exist in the English language ever before. Because these people want to be called by this or that, and in order not to offend them, we must comply. Right? Let me read the list to you. I mean, we refer to a man as him or himself, a woman as her or herself, a group of people as they or themselves. So the new pronouns now, air, that's A-E-R, and you refer to that particular person as air self, M, E-M, and you refer to that particular person as M self. And then you have per self, ver self, zem, that's X-E-M, zem self, and then H-I-R, here self. An entire list of pronouns invented, an entire language adjusted and changed to address the insanity, the absolute madness of a particular group of people who obviously need psychological help, and more than that, need Jesus. And instead of trying to change what these people are doing, the whole world, the leaders of the country, a Supreme Court nominee, a prime minister of a country, the whole world is going along with the madness that these people are trying to promote. This is what happens when men and societies find their own lives, when they become their own gods. This is what God was trying to keep from happening when he told Adam and Eve, do not separate yourselves from me by touching that fruit. But they did not understand. Let me continue with telling you some of the insanities that are happening with this group. And I'm certainly not preaching hate speech. What I'm doing is preaching the truth from the Bible and pointing it out just as it is. So I don't know if YouTube will remove this video when I'm finished, but at least I'll say what I have to say. I mean, most of us probably saw the video that Brother Wayne posted a few weeks ago. A teacher entered a classroom in an all-girls school in England. And I don't know what is happening in England. When I'm watching these things and reading these things, I'm finding out that a lot of these insanities are taking place in England. I don't know what is happening there. It's like the entire country has gone mad, right? The teacher walked into an all-girls, it's an all-girls school. She walked into the classroom and said, "Good morning, girls." Perfectly normal and sensible thing to do. One of those girls sitting there identifies as a boy. It's an all-girls school, but she identifies as a boy. And she was offended because the teacher said, "Good morning, girls." A complaint was filed, and you know what happened? Instead of them taking that student and counseling her and giving her intense psychiatric analysis, you know what they did? They forced the teacher to give a groveling, humiliating public apology for saying "good morning, girls" in an all-girls school. And what they are now doing as a result of that is trying to push for legislation that you cannot use the word girls. In an all-girls school, mind you, you have to say "good morning, students" or "good morning, pupils," because it is transphobic and discriminatory to say "good morning, girls" or "boys," or to use phrases like "he" or "she." In Canada, a professor was just fired recently because he refused to use the preferred transgender pronouns. His explanation was that it goes against his conscience to call a man "she" and to call a woman "he." He was fired because they said that he was not promoting inclusivity. What the other teachers do is to list the names of all their students on their phones, and beside the names of each of those students, they have that student's preferred pronoun. So if Sister Miriana prefers to be referred to as Zem, XCM, I put that beside her name in my phone. And Brother Kip prefers to be referred to as Ver, I have to put that beside his name in my phone. And I have to follow that, because if I say a pronoun that does not reflect what that person wants to be referred to as, I'm promoting hate, and I will offend that person, and I could lose my job. So this is the insanity that is taking place in the world. And one of the things that I notice is that the universities, the seat of learning, the place where the wise and the educated of the country are supposed to be originating from, these are the places where this filth and madness is being pushed. You go online and you listen to these university students, and they are so adamant and aggressive and so woke. It's frightening. And of course, it comes from the fact that this generation is being taught atheism. They are being taught that there is no God. So what do? They have to become the masters of their own lives. They have to find their own lives. And this is the inevitable outcome. It's the inevitable outcome. Of course, this insanity is causing mayhem. It's causing chaos all over the world. They caught this rapist, mass rapist. I think it's Ireland. I think it happened in Ireland. Huge man, 6'3" or 6'4" or something like that. They arrested him, took him to court, found all the evidence that he was guilty, and charged him. Now, when the day came to sentence him for the crimes that he had committed, you know what the man did? He claimed that he's a woman. Instead of throwing him promptly into a cell and throwing away the key, the lunatics, the ministers, the educated ones, you know what they did? They took him and they put him in a woman's prison because he said that he's a woman. So if I said to say, upon entering the woman's prison, he has now attacked several women in the prison. And they're at their wits' end as to what to do, because you can't put him in the man prison because after all, it's a woman, right? So the insanity has started to affect every aspect of society. It's affecting sports. It's affecting sports. What is happening is that men are identifying as women and switching over to compete in women's sports, right? I consider these men to be liars and cheats, because when they compete in the men's sports as men, they are useless. They can't do anything. They go over, they say they are women, and they go over to the women's sports and they start dominating. This one who calls himself Leah Smith, 6 feet something, muscular fellow. Of course, his bones are longer than any female. He has more muscle than any female. He is bearded and has a voice deeper than mine, but he says he's a woman. And so the swimming commission allows him to enter swimming as a woman. He's swimming with the woman, and of course, he decimates the field, shattering every female record, probably irrevocably, right? And he's a champion in the the transgender community. A great athlete and an example for the young, because he can break all these women records. He goes and he swims with men and he's dead last every time, right? Same thing in track and field. Another one entered track events as a female, started shattering all the female records. One record, he broke it by over 50 seconds. But for those of you who understand track and field, over 50 seconds means that that's more than the entire length of the track, the entire 400-meter track. He won the race by. I'm sorry, she won the race by, if I'm to join the madness, right? It happened in skating. Just this week, I watched the video. A 31-year-old man. He has 3 children. He's an ex-combat vet. He identified as a teenage girl. He got up one morning and decides he's a teenage girl. The skating commission says, well, if he says he's a girl, then he must be a girl. And if he says he's a teenager, then he must be a teenager, because to say otherwise is transphobic, right? So he's allowed to enter the skating category with the 13-year-old girls. He dismisses and dismantles all of them. And you know, I was so disgusted to see him standing there. He won the trophy and the cash prize, $1,000 cash prize, which could have changed the life of a 13-year-old girl. You see him standing there, raising his trophy and celebrating and jumping up with so satisfied with himself. And meanwhile, the little 13-year-old girls in the background standing there looking so sad and confused. Because they are supposed to believe that this big 31-year-old man who has 3 children almost their age is also a 13-year-old girl. That is what they're being asked to believe. But we are woke now, right? And we have found our own lives now, right? So we have to expand our thinking. I mean, it would be laughable if it wasn't so insane. Same thing happened in wrestling. One of them entered the wrestling competition as a woman. They said that to date he has cracked, I think it's 6 skulls that he has cracked. 6 women, because he's wrestling against women. A big man over 6 feet tall, he has cracked the skulls of 6 females thus far. Instead of the lunatics acknowledging that this is a man who does not belong in a female competition, they are now trying to solve the problem by suggesting that he takes injections to lessen the testosterone that he's producing. That's the solution. Give him injections to lessen his testosterone production. Because taking him and throwing him into the men's category is unheard of, because he's a woman. He that findeth his own life will lose it. The society that decides that it wants to be its own masters will lose its own life. And that is what we see happening today. It's insanity. One of the other things that they are doing is to take young children, 8 years old and 9 years old, children who are incapable of making any decisions for themselves. And I have to refer to it by the term chemical castration, right? They are injecting them. So they will take a boy and inject him with hormones from the time he's 8 or 9. And what those injections will do is suppress his testosterone development. So instead of developing normally like a boy should, his body starts to develop with certain effeminate traits. They are doing the same things to the girls. Some girls are starting to develop mustache and a deeper voice because of the chemicals that they are injecting them with. And by the time these children reach 17 or 18, they didn't have the chance to make a choice for themselves. So they become depressed and dejected because a man, I have female tendencies when I was supposed to be a man, and vice versa. So what you find is that they say that transgenders, 82% of transgenders contemplate suicide seriously, and 45% of them have attempted it. Because by the time you reach that stage of life, there's nothing left to live for. You have become your own God. You have found your own life. Your belief is in nothing but yourself. And while you're alive, you're dying, which is exactly what Jesus said would happen. It's a sad situation, and it's sad that they involve children in this. The last example I want to cite is of a situation in England again. A student identified as a cat. She got up one morning and she suddenly believed that she is a cat. Instead of the parents taking her and locking her in a room and counseling her and praying for her with olive oil and with fasting, the parents accepted that, well, if she says she's a cat, she must be a cat. They went to the school and demanded that the school insert a litter box into the bathroom, in the girls' bathroom, for her to use, because she cannot use the regular toilet that the other students use because she's a cat. The school refused to do it. You know, they said this is too much trouble. You know what the parents did? They took the school to court. You know what is even more amazing? The parents won the case. The court determined that if the girl says she's a cat, she's a cat. And it is mandatory that the school facilitate her in order not to promote discrimination. They forced the school to implement a litter box in the bathroom that the janitor has to clean every evening, just when he's cleaning the other toilets. I mean, you run out of words to speak to this kind of thing. And if somebody had said 5 years ago that this is where we would be, in a nightmare, I mean, it would be unbelievable. But, you know, this guy, Fyodor Dostoevsky, a Russian writer, he said something many years ago, which I had to read it because it's so true. Dostoevsky says that tolerance will reach such a level that intelligent people will be banned from thinking so as not to offend the imbeciles. That is what is happening. Intelligent people will be banned from thinking so as not to offend imbeciles. What we are seeing happening is the words of Jesus being fulfilled starkly and stunningly before our eyes. He that finds his own life, he that takes his own destiny into his own hands, he that believes that he can govern his own life and runs his own show and believes in himself while he's alive. I'm paraphrasing, right? But I believe that this is the ultimate interpretation of the verse. While he's alive, he will be dead. Because all of these people, they are not only dead in sins and trespasses, they are dead inside. They are hopeless. And that is why so many of them end up killing themselves, committing suicide, because there's nothing to live for. I realize my time is going, so let me hurry along. The beauty about the verse is that Jesus said something else. He didn't stop there. He said, he that loses his own life for my sake, you know what will happen to him? He shall find it. And that part of the verse is the exact opposite to the first part. If finding your life means becoming the masters of your own destiny and taking charge of your own life and believing in yourself, then losing your life means the opposite. It means to give your destiny to somebody else because you realize that you can't control your own destiny. It means to believe in somebody else because you realize that believing in yourself is folly and imminent disaster. That is what it means to lose your own life. And you know what Jesus says will happen? If you do this, you will find your life. You will find it. Abraham is a typical example of this truth. In Genesis chapter 12 and verse 1, it says, now the Lord had said unto Abraham, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto Canaan, unto Moab, unto Egypt. No, unto a land that I will show thee. What a strange command for God to give Abraham. God never said to Abraham, leave your home and go to Philistia. He didn't even tell Abraham where he was sending him to. What he asked Abraham to do was to step out of his comfort zone and trust him. I imagine myself in Abraham's position. I've lived in Jamaica all my life. This is my home. It's where my family is. It's where my friends are. It's where all my memories are. It's where I have settled down and invested everything I have. If God said to me this morning, get up and pack your bag and go and sit at the airport in Kingston. I'm sending you somewhere. You are never coming back here. But I'm not even telling you where I'm sending you. I mean, that requires faith. That requires confidence. That requires somebody who has given his own destiny, his whole destiny to God. I don't know if God could say that to any of us on the platform, including myself this morning. I don't know if we have yet submitted our destiny to that extent. But you know what? Abraham never even said to God, where am I going? You notice that he didn't ask God any questions. He packed up all he had, his wife, his servants, his possessions. He left all the friends that he had known from the time he was a boy. All the memories, all the places that were familiar to him. Leaving it all behind to go somewhere where he did not know because God said so. That is a man who had lost his own life for the sake of God. That is the kind of man that God was looking for. And you know, because of this course of action that Abraham took, even today he's known as the father of the faithful. Everywhere that Abraham went, he was blessed. Everywhere that he went, he prospered. Eventually, Abraham became the ancestor of the Son of God himself. He had a happy, fulfilling life. He saw a son born in his own image when he was 100 years old. Wonderful things happened in his life because he lost his own life for the sake of the master. You see the contrast? You see the opposite happening when you submit and when you give our lives to him. You see the opposite? It was the same thing with Moses. When God appeared to Moses and commissioned him to go and free the Israelites from the bondage of the Egyptians, somebody who was woke and who was full of himself And who was his own master would have responded differently. But look at what Moses says in Exodus chapter 4 and verse 10. And Moses said unto the Lord, O my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither heretofore nor since thou hast spoken unto thy servant, but I am slow of speech and of a slow tongue. Moses didn't get the memo that you have to believe in yourself. Moses didn't get the memo that you have infinite possibilities inside of you. He didn't get the memo that when you believe in yourself, you have 100% of what you need. He didn't get that memo. Moses had zero self-esteem, zero self-confidence, zero belief in himself. Eventually, God had to say to him, I will send somebody to speak for you. He lost his own life. And that was when God was ready to use him. He saw himself as nothing. And then God said, no, you are ready. Moses became the greatest prophet of the Old Testament. He became a God. Even today, the status that Moses holds among the Jews is like that of a God. A fabulous life. At 120 years old, his eye was not dim. He died sleeping in the arms of his Savior because he lost his own life. Same thing with Gideon. The angel comes to Gideon and he says, God has chosen you to save Israel from the Midianites. Gideon doesn't jump up and say, well, yes, I have certain military training that I believe can help me. My family has some reputation in Israel. I believe the people will listen to me. In Judges chapter 6 and verse 15, look what Gideon says. And he said unto him, O my Lord, wherewith shall I save Israel? Behold, my family is poor in Manasseh, and I am what? I am the least in my father's house. Another man who didn't believe in himself. Another man who had no confidence in himself. Another man who had no desire to rule his own destiny. He saw himself as nothing. And again, God said, now that you are in this position, you are ready for greatness. You are ready. Gideon took 300 men and defeated 30,000 Midianites, a story that is still talked about today. Because he that loses his own life, then, and only then, can he find true strength and become something great in the Lord. Now, the last example I want to look at, because I realize that time is almost gone. I want to look at a man who lost himself in the Lord and then found himself. I'm speaking about the first king of Israel. God sent Samuel to anoint Saul as the first king of Israel. Now, even though Saul was head and shoulders taller than any man in Israel, Saul was a humble fellow. He was a timid fellow. He didn't think much of himself. He didn't have any belief in himself. When Samuel anointed Saul and he wanted to show him to the people, you know what Saul did? He didn't come out beating his chest and holding his head high and proclaiming his greatness. You know what Saul did? He went and he hid himself among the baggage because he thought so little of himself, he had no confidence to come out. He didn't believe that if you believe in yourself, you can achieve anything. He didn't believe that all you need is yourself. He believed that he was incapable and unworthy. He went and hid himself. But as Saul grew into the role of king, something started to happen to him. Saul started to find his own life. He started to become a little more woke. He started to believe in himself and his own abilities more. And eventually, Saul started to lose his own life. Samuel, the Israelites were going to fight against the Philistines. And as was customary, and as the Lord had commanded, Samuel was the one who was supposed to offer the sacrifice. Nobody in Israel would dare disobey that command because it came from God. But look at what Saul did. In 1 Samuel 13, I'm going to read a couple verses here. Starting at verse 9. It says, and Saul said, bring hither a burnt offering to me and peace offerings, and he offered the burnt offering himself. What presumption, what boldness, what courage, what confidence in himself. And it came to pass that as soon as he had made an end of offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him, that he might salute him. And Samuel said, what hast thou done? And Saul said, well, because I saw that the people were scattered from me, and that thou camest not within the days appointed, and that the Philistines gathered themselves together at Michmash. Therefore said I, the Philistines will come down now upon me to Gilgal, and I have not made supplication unto the Lord. I forced myself, therefore, and offered a burnt offering. He's making all kinds of excuse for defying God. And Samuel said to Saul, thou hast done foolishly. This is one of the inevitable outcomes of finding your own life, brothers and sisters. You start doing foolishly. This is why we have a movement on the world today, and movements which are folly itself, and they can't see it. He goes on, thou hast not kept the commandment of the Lord thy God, which he commanded thee. For now the Lord hath established thy kingdom upon Israel forever. But now the kingdom shall not continue. The Lord had sought him a man after his own heart, and the Lord had commanded him to be captain over his people, because thou hast not kept that which the Lord commanded thee. I'm proposing to you that by this time, Saul had started to lose his own life, because he had started to grow in himself. He had started to think highly of himself. And we can see that instead of repenting, this ideology grew in Saul's mind, because the same thing happens again when Samuel says to him, go and wipe out the Amalekites, and don't even leave a dog alive. A direct instruction from God himself again. Saul has a second chance to maybe redeem himself somewhat. But instead, in 1 Samuel chapter 15 and verse 20, instead Saul does the opposite. He attacks the Amalekites like he's instructed, but instead of wiping out every living thing, he keeps some of the fat and the spoil for himself. Defies God deliberately. Like these people who are changing their bodies and claiming that they can do whatever they want. Forget about God. And Saul said unto Samuel, yea, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord, and have gone the way which the Lord had sent me, and have brought Agag the king of Amalek, and have utterly destroyed the Amalekites, lying to Samuel's face. But the people took of the spoiled sheep and oxen, the chief of the things which should have been utterly destroyed, to sacrifice unto the Lord thy God in Gilgal. And Samuel said, hath the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to hearken than the fat of rams. He goes on in verse 23 to say, because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he hath also rejected thee from being king. But the verse I want to highlight this morning and to remind us of and to emphasize is verse 17. Look at what Samuel says. And Samuel said, when thou wast little in thine own sight, wast thou not made the head of the tribes of Israel? And the Lord anointed thee king over Israel. Brothers and sisters, I'm proposing to you this morning that this is the key. This is the ultimate key. This is the foundation of accomplishing and achieving anything at all. It is to remember when you were little before the Lord. It is to remember that when we lose our lives for his sake, that is when he can use us, not before. When you believe that you can achieve and you can accomplish and you have all this potential and greatness inside of you, you're only headed for destruction. It is when you are little, when you choose to die and give up your own will, your own determinations as to what is right for you, then it is, and only then, that the Lord can use us to achieve great things. And so I want us to remember that I'm going to stop here this morning because I know that Brother Howard is going to present and I don't want to overstep the time. But I'll read one final verse which summarizes everything that I said. In Matthew chapter 11 and verse 25, look at what Jesus says. He says, at that time, Jesus answered and said, I thank thee, O Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because thou hast hid these things from the wise and prudent. You have hidden these things from those who have found their own lives, those who have become their own gods. You have hidden the truths of God from them, and you have revealed them unto babes, unto those who are little, unto those who have lost their own lives. In fact, the word babes there comes from the Greek word nepios, which means a simple-minded person. A simple-minded person. So, in closing, let us remember that it is in losing ourselves to Him that we are worthy and fit to be used in His service. Thank you for listening. I appreciate your attentiveness, and I hope that these words will help us in our relationship and in our walk with the Lord. Please bow your heads with me as we close this session.